At 5:18, one quiet morning, Emma sat alone in her car outside the hospital, staring at a sunrise she barely noticed. She thought she had nothing left to give the day, until a folded note slipped from an old Bible and reminded her of a promise she had almost forgotten. At 5:18 on a cool spring morning, the hospital parking lot was almost empty. A pale ribbon of light stretched across the horizon, slowly pushing back the darkness. But Emma hardly noticed. She rested both hands on the steering wheel of her aging sedan, the engine already off, yet she couldn't bring herself to drive home. After another 12-hour night shift as a nurse, every part of her body felt heavy. Her feet ached, her shoulders burned with exhaustion, and her mind refused to slow down. In just a few hours, her 8-year-old son, Caleb, would wake up asking innocent questions she wasn't sure how to answer anymore. Bills waited on the kitchen counter. A medical appointment loomed later that week. Every new sunrise seemed to arrive carrying another weight she had to lift alone. For a long moment, she simply watched her own reflection in the windshield. The woman staring back looked older than 34. There were faint lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a few years ago, and the smile that once came so easily now appeared only on rare occasions. She whispered a prayer so quietly that even she could barely hear it. "Lord, I know you're here. I just don't know how to begin today." Silence answered first. Not an empty silence, but the kind that asks you to stay a little longer before walking away. Emma reached toward the passenger seat, searching for a tissue beneath a stack of paperwork. Instead, her hand brushed against the worn leather cover of the Bible her mother had given her nearly 15 years earlier. The edges of its pages were soft from use, though lately it had spent more time riding in her car than resting in her hands. She opened it almost absent-mindedly, and before she could read a single verse, a small folded piece of paper slipped free and landed in her lap. She frowned. She didn't remember placing anything inside. Carefully unfolding the yellowed note, she recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. It was gentle and unmistakable, as familiar as hearing her voice after all these years. "Start every morning remembering who walks before you." Emma stared at the words without moving. Her mother had written them only a few months before cancer took her home to the Lord. Back then, Emma had been newly married, hopeful, and convinced life would unfold exactly as she planned. She had smiled politely when her mother tucked the note inside the Bible, never imagining she would someday need those words far more than she had then. A breeze drifted through the slightly opened window, carrying the scent of fresh rain and blooming trees. For the first time that morning, Emma lifted her eyes toward the sunrise. She remembered something else her mother used to say whenever they watched dawn together. "Every sunrise is proof that God's mercy arrived before you did." Those words echoed the beautiful promise found in Lamentations 3:22-23, where Scripture reminds us that the Lord's steadfast love never fails, and His mercies are new every morning. Her mother had always explained that these verses were not meant for perfect mornings. They were written for weary hearts that needed hope before anything around them had changed. God doesn't wait for our circumstances to improve before offering His mercy. He sends it with the sunrise itself. Emma closed her eyes. Nothing about her situation had suddenly become easier. The unpaid bills were still waiting. Caleb still needed her strength. Another shift was already scheduled for that evening. Yet something inside her began to loosen. Not because her problems had disappeared, but because she realized she had started measuring God's presence by the absence of hardship. Maybe His faithfulness had been quietly walking beside her all along. She slipped the note back between the pages of the Bible and rested it against her chest. For the first time in weeks, she took a slow, steady breath without feeling crushed by tomorrow. Then her phone vibrated. One message. One unexpected notification that made the color drain from her face. She unlocked the screen, and what she read changed the direction of her morning completely. Emma stared at the message, reading it twice before the words truly settled in her heart. "Insurance denied part of Caleb's procedure. Please contact the billing office as soon as possible." Her chest tightened. She had prepared herself for long shifts, sleepless nights, and careful budgeting, but not this. She closed her eyes, fighting the familiar wave of panic that always arrived before sunrise seemed to have a chance to become hope. For a brief moment, every fearful thought rushed in at once. What if I can't afford this? What if I have to choose between paying rent and paying for my son's care? How much longer can I keep pretending I'm strong? She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Then her eyes drifted back to the Bible resting on the passenger seat. Almost without thinking, she opened it again. This time, the pages fell naturally to Proverbs 3. Her gaze settled on words she had memorized years ago but hadn't truly lived in recent months. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. Her mother had once explained that this passage was never an invitation to stop thinking or planning. It was an invitation to stop believing that peace depends on having every answer. Trust begins where certainty ends. God often guides one faithful step at a time instead of revealing the entire road ahead. Emma looked out at the brightening sky. She still had no solution, no extra money, no guarantee. Yet something quietly shifted inside her. Instead of asking, "How will I fix this?" another question rose gently in her spirit. "Lord, how do you want me to walk through today?" The question didn't erase her fear, but it loosened fear's grip. She started the car and slowly drove toward home. Morning traffic was beginning to fill the streets. People hurried toward offices, schools, coffee shops, each carrying burdens invisible to everyone else. Looking around, Emma realized she wasn't the only one beginning the day with unanswered questions. Every car beside hers held someone fighting a battle she could not see. When she arrived home, Caleb was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal. His backpack leaned against the chair, and his favorite baseball cap rested beside it. "Morning, Mom," he said with the kind of smile only children seem able to offer before the world grows complicated. "Did you have a hard night?" Emma smiled back, though her eyes were still tired. "A little." He walked over and wrapped his small arms around her waist without saying another word. She held him longer than usual. Children rarely understand financial stress or medical paperwork, but they somehow know exactly when someone needs a hug. As Caleb left for school a short while later, Emma sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. The house became quiet again. Her eyes wandered toward a framed family photograph on the shelf. It had been taken years earlier, before her husband unexpectedly left, before her mother's illness, before life became a collection of responsibilities instead of simple moments. She could have focused on everything she had lost. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you, Lord." Caleb is healthy enough to laugh this morning. It wasn't a dramatic prayer. It wasn't long. But gratitude quietly opened a door that worry had kept locked. The phone rang again. This time it wasn't the hospital. It was Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly neighbor Emma occasionally helped with groceries. "I know this is sudden," the older woman said warmly, "but I baked too much banana bread this morning. Would you mind stopping by? I could use the company." Emma almost declined. She had phone calls to make, bills to organize, and emotions she wasn't ready to face. Yet something nudged her heart to say yes. She had no idea that this simple visit, one she nearly refused, would become the beginning of an answer she never could have planned. Emma carried the warm loaf of banana bread back to Mrs. Jenkins' small porch, expecting nothing more than a brief conversation before returning home to the long list waiting on her kitchen table. The elderly woman welcomed her with a gentle smile and 2 steaming cups of tea. The house smelled of cinnamon and old books, the kind of place where time seemed to move more slowly. For a while, they talked about ordinary things: the changing weather, Caleb's love for baseball, the flowers blooming along the sidewalk. It was comforting, but Emma's mind kept drifting back to the insurance message. She tried to hide her worry, yet Mrs. Jenkins noticed the sadness in her eyes. "My dear," she said softly, "you don't have to tell me everything, but I can tell you're carrying something heavy." Emma hesitated. She wasn't used to admitting she was struggling. For months, she had convinced herself that strength meant staying silent. But sitting across from someone who had walked with Christ for decades made it feel safe to be honest. "I don't know how everything is going to work out," Emma admitted. "I've been praying, but today it feels like I'm standing in the middle of a road without knowing which way to go." Mrs. Jenkins reached across the table and gently placed her hand over Emma's. When Jesus said in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest," he wasn't promising that every burden would disappear overnight. He was offering something even deeper. He was inviting weary hearts to stop carrying their lives alone. The words settled quietly into Emma's spirit. She realized she had been asking God to remove every difficulty before allowing herself to experience peace. Yet Christ was offering peace before the circumstances changed. They bowed their heads together and prayed, not for miracles that would instantly erase every problem, but for wisdom, courage, daily provision, and hearts that would continue trusting God's faithfulness one step at a time. As Emma prepared to leave, Mrs. Jenkins handed her a small envelope. "I've been saving this for someone who might need encouragement," she said with a smile. Inside wasn't a large check or a dramatic solution. It was a handwritten card containing another verse, Isaiah 41:10. "Fear not, for I am with you. I will strengthen you. I will help you." Below the verse, Mrs. Jenkins had written only one sentence: "God's presence is often the first answer, even when His provision arrives later." Emma smiled through tears. Driving home, the problems waiting for her hadn't disappeared. The insurance company still needed to be called. Bills still sat on the counter. Her schedule remained demanding. But her heart no longer felt trapped by fear. That afternoon, after speaking with the billing office, she learned there were payment options she hadn't known existed. A charitable assistance program would cover part of Caleb's treatment, and the remaining balance could be paid over time. It wasn't the miraculous ending she might have imagined, but it was enough for today's need. As the sun slowly climbed higher across the sky, Emma thought back to the note that had fallen from her old Bible. "Start every morning remembering who walks before you." Now she finally understood. God had not abandoned her during the long nights. He had been quietly preparing her heart before preparing her path. His greatest gift that morning wasn't the immediate removal of every obstacle. It was the assurance that she would never face those obstacles alone. That evening, as Caleb laughed over dinner and sunlight poured gently through the kitchen window, Emma whispered one final prayer. "Father, thank you for reminding me that every sunrise is more than the beginning of another day. It is another invitation to trust you. Help me remember that your mercy reaches me before my worries do. Your love arrives before my fears awaken, and your presence goes before every step I will ever take. Whatever tomorrow brings, let my first thought always be that you are already there." Some mornings begin with answers. Others begin with uncertainty. But every morning offers the same unchanging invitation: to place our hearts into the hands of the one who has never failed to keep His promises. If today's story reminded you that God is already walking ahead of you, even when the road feels uncertain, remember that your hope does not depend on perfect circumstances. It rests in His faithful presence, renewed every morning. If this story encouraged your heart today, we'd love to have you join the Divine Trace family by subscribing. Share this story with someone who may need a reminder that God never begins a day without them. And if there's something weighing on your heart, leave your prayer request in the comments. We would be honored to pray with you. May the Lord fill your mornings with faith, your heart with peace, and your journey with the quiet confidence that He is always leading the way.